Hey everybody, Ryan here at etrailer. Today on our 2022 Ford Escape, we're going to be showing you how to install the Blue Ox base plate kit with removable arms. But before we get into that, why don't we take a minute, check this out, and make sure it'll work for you. Before we kind of jump right in and get into too much detail about the base plate, I figured it'd be beneficial just to kind of go over and refresh ourselves on the main parts that we're going to need to flat tow our vehicle down the road in the first place. There's going to be a total of 5 main components that you're going to need. First one will be the base plate, and that's going to provide us with a solid and reliable attachment point. That way we can hook our tow bar up to it. So tow bar is going to be the second component, and this is going to be the physical link that actually connects the front of your vehicle to the back of your motorhome. Third main component will be your safety cables, and these are there in the event of an unlikely disconnect. We're going to keep everything paired together. The fourth main component will be tow bar wiring, and what this is going to do is transfer the lighting functions from the back of your coach to the back of your SUV, keeping you safe and legal. And last but not least, the fifth main component will be a supplemental braking system, and what this is going to do is apply the brakes in your towed vehicle whenever you hit the brakes in your coach, helping to bring you to a more predictable and complete stop. This is what your Ford Escape's going to look like whenever you're not hooked up to your motorhome, and I feel like that's pretty important because chances are good you're not always going to be flat towing, right? So you want something that's going to look decent. And with this setup, I feel like it's about as good as it's going to get. I mean, when it comes down to it, you are going to be putting a bunch of stuff in the front, so you can only hide it so much. But you know, this one, it's matte black. It kind of matches the plastic on your bumper and does a pretty decent job of actually blending in. I do like the fact that there's brackets pre-attached to the base plate. That way you're able to mount up your breakaway switch as well as your wiring connector. So they pick out a spot that works, and it's one less thing you have to worry about. Another big thing with base plates and flat towing in general is how easy is it going to be to use. And with a setup like this, it's pretty straightforward. They give you these removable arms, so whenever you are ready to hook up, you're going to take these and put them in the base plate. They give you some caps too, you can pop in there, keep those protected. But those are just going to slide in, rotate them about a quarter turn until they lock into place. And it's the same deal over here on this side. Once you have the removable arms in, it's going to allow you to hook up your tow bar and your other components. So you'll line it up, put your pin through, and obviously hook up the rest of your stuff. The base plate is going to work with Blue Ox tow bars. Today we're using the Avail. Seems to be a really good fit, but it'll work with other Blue Ox tow bars as well as other manufacturers. A lot of times they make adapter ends that allow different brands to pair up with this base plate. So if you already have a tow bar or something like that, that's always something you can check into. We've seen how your Ford will look whenever you're just cruising around town. This is how it can look whenever you're hooked up to your motorhome. And I like it. You know, everything's visible, easy to get to, and looks organized. So one quick glance back here, you can double check and make sure everything is hooked up properly. Compared to some of the other base plates that I've done on the Escape, this one seemed just to fit a little bit better, and it works well when adding other parts, you know, like your wiring and everything else. So, you know, definitely a good option for you if you're considering setting up a flat tow on your Escape. As far as the installation goes, you know, it wasn't too terrible. You know, regardless of what vehicle you got, I mean, it's going to take some time, right? The fascia has to come off. There is a little bit of drilling that you need to do, and you know, there's a few steps, so be prepared to spend a little bit of time doing it. But if that's something you plan on tackling, feel free to follow along. We'll go ahead, pull into the garage, and put it on together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the front of our Escape, and we're going to have to remove the front fascia. So pop your hood, and then along this front edge, we're going to have 4 bolts that we need to pull out. So here's the fasteners that we're going to pull out along that edge. And we're going to remove them using a 10mm socket. Now if you move to your wheel well edge, we're going to have 8 push pin type fasteners that we need to pull out. Does help if you turn your wheel in one way or the other, gives you a little more room. And to get these out, you can take a trim tool or a flathead screwdriver, works as well. Just pry underneath the head. And then work the base out. So I'll just continue along here until we get all those removed. And I want to mention from this point on, anything we do to one side of the vehicle, we're also going to do on the other side, because it'll be set up the exact same way. So what we can do now, we have this piece of wheel well trim. We need to peel that back. While I'm right here, I put some painter's tape along where we're going to be working. That way we don't scratch anything on accident. But this piece essentially just kind of pops off and gets about this point here. And what you can do is just take a paper towel or something, kind of wedge it in there to keep it away from the vehicle. And then you can take your wheel well liner, just kind of tuck that out of the way. And up where the quarter panel actually meets the fascia, along this bottom edge here, there's going to be 2 10mm bolts that we need to pull out. So this is going to be pretty tricky to pick up on screen here, but where that seam runs, there's 2 10mm head bolts. The head of the bolt will be facing down towards the ground, and so you can get up in there and get both those removed. A little bit later on, once we get the fascia kind of popped off, get a little more space, I can give you a better idea of where them bolts kind of go up into. Then moving over here on the passenger side, and only on the passenger side, we're going to have this big electrical connector. And we can pop that off, and we're going to need to disconnect it. So with this one, it looks like this gray piece, you should be able to kind of spin it back and crack that loose like that, and then we'll be able to disconnect it. Underneath the front of our vehicle now, on each side of it, we're going to have 2 7mm head screws. So we'll pop those out, and then we'll switch that 7 out for a T30 Torx bit and pull out 5 of these. So now we're ready to actually get the fascia off. The tricky thing is with these, about right here in this area, it's going to be really hard to see again until we kind of pop this down. But there's a plastic tab that kind of runs up into the fender, and if you just pull down on this or pull it out, you're going to destroy it, and obviously you don't want to do that. But that plastic, almost like a pyramid shape almost, on the sides of it there will be tabs, and you got to push both those in, and once you do, it'll release. And so you can take a pick like this or even a screwdriver and come in from the back. I'm going to try this one though. Let's see if it'll work. I don't know if it will or not. I might just have to come in from the back here. So I got the small screwdriver pushing in the back one, and I'll do the same thing for this front one here until it releases down. So this is what I was doing. I was pushing it on these pieces here, and really haven't found a better way to do this. So just take your time with it and get it to drop down. But we'll do that on the other side. I'll grab a friend and we can actually get the fascia off. So we'll go ahead and kind of pull straight back, and then this thing actually comes off really easy. Double check for any wires you may have missed, but we're in good shape, so we'll go ahead and set this off to the side. With the fascia out of the way, now we can remove this lower piece here where our underbody panel kind of attaches to. Each side of the car, you're gonna have two 13mm head bolts. I already removed the other side. If you remove those four and this doesn't come off, take a peek under here, and turns out on our vehicle we have an additional 10mm bolt on each side. Now you should be able to slide this out and set it off to the side for now. On both sides of our vehicle where this air dam is located, we are going to have to trim some of that material off to clear the base plate. So I just followed the diagram and the instructions, marked it out, and I'm just using a pair of snips to get this removed. On each side of our vehicle, we're going to have a plastic piece kind of on this support area here that has to get removed. Diagram and instructions, I marked it out. When I cut that one out, there's essentially the same thing behind it. I'm just going to cut all that out. That way our base plate will clear. So this being kind of hard plastic, I'm going to use a Dremel tool to kind of speed things up. Back underneath our vehicle, I'm going to remove this belly pan. Looks like there'll be like 5 screws on each side. And so I'm just going to work my way down. I already removed the ones on the other side. And this is a 7mm that I'm using. And push that forward and then it'll drop down. Just over here on the driver's side, we're gonna have this black box, and this is gonna have to get temporarily just kind of loosened up and not so much removed, but let hang out of the way, make it easier to get our base plate on. So we're gonna have one bolt right here, or one nut rather. That's a 10mm. And then if you see this piece of metal here, there's going to be a bracket on this box that attaches it to this in 2 different spots up underneath the vehicle though. So we'll get under there and take a look at those. So underneath the vehicle, like we talked about, there's one bolt there and one here. Obviously this one has this plastic thing snapped onto it, so we'll pry that off and then we'll get those removed with a 10mm socket. Those loose now, we can kind of just work this off and let it hang down out of the way. So at this point I went ahead, took this piece that we removed and reinstalled it, except I'm only putting in the 10mm bolts here at the bottom because when our base plate goes on, it's going to sit here and we'll use the existing bolts to help secure the base plate. And then you want to grab the base plate. If your braking system uses a breakaway switch, which I believe they all do, you're going to want to install that first. Since there's a pre-attached tab where you can bolt it to, pretty straightforward, just use your nut and bolt. It makes it a little bit easier off the vehicle. So grab our base plate and slide this into position. And actually on this one, what I might do is set this down and come back with a pry tool and get rid of this wiring here. That way we don't have to risk pinching it or anything along those lines. So with this here, that should be enough. If you feel inclined to, there's a couple more of these plastic fasteners and holding this wire loom on that you can pry off as well. And it'll probably just make it easier to get our base plate around all this. So with that out of the way now, we'll try this again. We'll push that in place. And it'll slide on. We'll line this up. You're going to take the existing hardware, put on some red Loctite on the threads. That Loctite doesn't come with the kit, so you can grab it here at etrailer. And we're going to be using red Loctite on all the bolts that are securing the base plate. So I got this bolt started as well. And if everything's just a little bit off, you can take a jack. I'm using a pole jack. You can also use your floor jack and just kind of put pressure up on it to get everything kind of lined up a little bit better. Make sure that these are in there hand tight. Then we'll come back with the 13 and just snug them down. Now we need to drill out this hole here in the side of our base plate. To help keep things lined up, I'm just going to take this bar here, put it in this top hole just to kind of keep it steady while we drill. And I'll come back with the proper size bit and drill through the sheet metal there. Once you got that hole drilled out, there's this tab here that kind of ramps up like this. And take a pair of pliers and just bend it. Kind of about like that. And that way it'll give us room to get our handle nut in there. And so the way this is going to work, you take the handle nut, there's a big end and a little end. Big end goes up top, so it'll set like that. That'll slide up in behind there, you line it up, and then take the hardware and run it through. Before you get to that, make sure to take the right size bolts and just thread them in by hand. Make sure they don't get hung up. Sometimes you can get, some welding slop in there that hangs it up. And if that's the case, save yourself some time. Get it cleaned out. You can use a tap, or if you got an extra bolt. Either way, just kind of a pointer there. You'll run into that occasionally, but going to run this in, line it up, start with this one, take the smaller bolt, your red Loctite, and your lock washer. We'll get that started, and these sometimes can be kind of a pain to get going, so just take your time, and eventually you'll get it to take hold there. So let's get one of them started, and then obviously we'll take the next one to get it going. That's a 1/2 inch bolt, and you put on a split lock washer as well, and your red Loctite. So now that both of these are started hand tight, and come back and snug them down. This one will be a 9/16. And this one you can use a 3/4 inch. Once you have all of the hardware in place and hand tight, you need to make sure to come back with a torque wrench and tighten everything down to the amount specified in the instructions. So what I'm going to do now, this handle portion here, sometimes you can bend these back and forth and get them to break off, but I'm just going to take a pair of snips, clip it out of the way. I'm going to take a hammer and just bend this tab back flush. From there I went ahead and installed our safety cables. So pretty tight, not a lot of room to work, but you take your D-link, put it through your base plate hole, and then the cables, it's kind of tricky to see, but ran them around that portion of our frame. And then I like to zip tie them here and there just to prevent these from, you know, clanking around. And do that to both sides. And then after that, you'll want to reinstall, or resecure rather, this box here the opposite way that you removed it. At this point, it'd be a great time to install some of your other flat towing components, like your braking system and your wiring and things of that nature. And that's because while this is a part, obviously you have a lot more space to work, right? So that's exactly what I'm gonna do. And once I'm done with that, then we can come back and start to work on getting our fascia reinstalled. So now that we have all of our other components installed and all wrapped up, we can get our fascia trimmed out. So if you flip it on the front side, and just to give you a reference, over here where we're going to be working, this would be on the passenger side for vehicles. So here's a air temperature sensor. We're going to relocate that. So you can just take a trim tool or a screwdriver, pop that harness free, and what I'm going to do is just kind of bring it here in this area and take a couple of zip ties and re-secure it. And honestly, this plastic piece, I'll probably just cut that out of the way. That way it don't get, you know, our luck could get hung up on the base plate. So we'll just get rid of that so you don't even have to bother with it. What we can do now is look at the instructions, and they're going to give you a few places that you need to cut. So I marked them out, and this is kind of double layered, if you will. You want to make sure you only want to trim through that first layer of plastic. You know, to try to avoid any potential damage, I'm going to use snips wherever I can to cut this out, but eventually I'll probably switch over to my Dremel tool and get the rest of that material removed. So pretty straightforward here. I'll just start to get all that out of the way. You are going to have to trim off this pedestal here that the wiring was originally secured to as well. So really no way to get that one with the snips. So I'll just carefully use my Dremel here. So I'll continue to clean this area up, get it as flat as I can, and then remove the material off the other side. With the back of our fascia trimmed out, we can now trim out the front, and it's really just going to depend on your setup. But for the majority of people, honestly, just cutting out this whole little area here on each side is probably going to be the best bet. Especially over here on this side, because you have your wiring and stuff, and then if you have a breakaway switch and other components, which you probably will, these are going to be in the way too. So, and then it'll look uniform. But with that in mind, I'm going to get these removed. Now that we have everything trimmed out, we can take our fascia and put it back in position, reinstalling it the opposite way that we removed it. So for the most part, everything cleared on our fascia, with the exception of these tabs. So if I had to do it again before the fascia is on, make sure you cut these as flush as possible. That way it'll clear. I mean, we could jam it on there, but I'll just go ahead and remove that little bit of material and it'll fit a lot better. So after making those adjustments, you know, cutting those a little more flush, everything went back together really well actually. Just reinstall it the opposite way that you removed it. And just a quick note, don't forget to make sure and plug that connector back in over on the passenger side of your vehicle. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Blue Ox baseplate kit with removable arms on our 2022 Ford Escape.